Marcus sat alone at a corner table in the small neighborhood cafe, his 5-year-old daughter, Zoe, coloring quietly beside him. And he hadn't realized that the woman standing 3 feet away, trembling slightly with her hands raised in deliberate gestures, had been trying to get his attention for almost 30 seconds, till Zoe tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, that lady is talking with her hands." Marcus looked up, his tired eyes meeting the gaze of a woman in her early 30s with gentle features, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a faded blue cardigan over a white dress. And her hands were still moving, slowly, carefully forming signs he didn't understand, but her face told him everything. She was alone, deeply alone, and she was asking for something he'd felt every single day since his wife died 2 years ago: connection. He blinked, uncertain, and the woman seemed to sense his confusion because she lowered her hands, pulled out her phone, typed something quickly, and turned the screen toward him, and the words glowed in simple black text. "I'm alone. Can I join you? I'm deaf. It's hard to find people who will sit with me." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, a wall he'd built brick by brick since the funeral, since the casseroles stopped coming, since the phone calls became less frequent, since he realized that grief is the loneliest country, and he'd been living there, with only Zoe to remind him that love still existed. And without thinking too hard about it, he smiled a real smile, the kind he hadn't worn in months. Sand gestured to the empty chair across from him, nodding slowly, and the woman's entire face transformed, relief washing over her features like sunrise, and she sat down carefully, placing her coffee cup on the table with both hands, as if it were something precious. Zoe stared openly, her crayon paused mid-stroke, and Marcus gently reminded her, "It's okay to be curious, baby, but let's be kind." And Zoe nodded solemnly, then did something that made both adults freeze. She waved at the woman, a big, enthusiastic wave, and the woman waved back, her eyes glistening, and Marcus realized that this stranger was crying, silently, tearlessly, the kind of crying that happens in the soul. And he understood it because he'd done it 1,000 times in the shower, in the car, in the dark, after Zoe fell asleep. The woman typed on her phone again and showed him, "My name is Alina. Thank you. You don't know what this means." Marcus took his own phone out, feeling awkward and slow, and typed back, "I'm Marcus. This is Zoe. You're welcome here." And that was how it started, a friendship, born not from shared history or common interests, but from the raw, aching need to be seen, to matter, to sit across from another human being and know you're not invisible. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Alina developed a routine that neither of them planned but both desperately needed. Every Saturday morning at 10, they'd meet at the same cafe, sometimes with Zoe, sometimes just the two of them, when Zoe was with Marcus's mother, and they'd communicate through a clumsy but beautiful combination of typed notes, exaggerated facial expressions, and a slowly growing vocabulary of basic signs that Marcus started learning from YouTube videos late at night after Zoe went to bed. He learned hello and thank you and friend, practicing the movements in the bathroom mirror, feeling foolish and hopeful at the same time. And the first time he signed good morning to Alina without reaching for his phone, her face lit up with such pure joy that he felt something shift inside him, something that had been frozen beginning to thaw, and he realized he'd spent 2 years simply surviving, moving through the motions of fatherhood and work and grocery shopping and bedtime stories. But he hadn't been living, not really, not since the cancer took his wife Sarah in a brutal 6-month spiral that left him hollowed out and angry at a universe that could be so cruel. Alina, he learned through their patient phone-typed conversations, had lost her hearing at age 7 due to meningitis, had grown up in foster care where no one learned to sign, had aged out of the system at 18, had worked a series of jobs where she was tolerated but not included, had tried to build friendships that dissolved when people grew tired of the effort it took to communicate with her, and had spent the last 3 years living in a tiny studio apartment, working remotely as a data entry specialist, ordering groceries online, and going days, sometimes weeks, without a single meaningful human interaction. "I became a ghost," she typed to Marcus one Saturday, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "I'm alive, but no one sees me. I exist, but I don't matter. The silence isn't the hard part, it's the loneliness." Marcus read her words 3 times, his throat tight, and then he typed back, "I know. My wife died and people brought food and said prayers, and then they went back to their lives. I'm surrounded by people at work, at Zoe's school, at the grocery store, but I'm alone in every room I enter. Until now." They sat in silence after that. But it wasn't empty, it was full, heavy with understanding. And when Alina reached across the table and squeezed his hand once, quickly, before pulling back, Marcus felt more connected to another human being than he had in 2 years. Zoe, with the unfiltered wisdom of children, became the bridge that turned their friendship into something deeper, something like family. She started asking Marcus to teach her signs, and he'd pull up videos on his laptop and they'd practice together, their hands clumsy and laughing when they got it wrong. And Zoe would perform her new skills for Alina with the pride of a concert pianist, signing "I like you" and "pretty" and "will you be my friend?" And Alina would sign back, her movements slow and clear so Zoe could follow. And Marcus would watch them with an ache in his chest that was both painful and healing. Because Zoe was smiling again, really smiling, the way she used to before her mother got sick, before the hospital visits, and the whispered conversations, and the funeral, where she sat between Marcus and his mother, small and silent and confused. One Saturday, Zoe asked Alina, through a combination of signs and Marcus's translation, "Do you have a family?" And Alina's face flickered with something raw before she composed herself and typed, "No, I don't, but I'd like to." Zoe, with the breathtaking directness of a 5-year-old, said, "You can be in our family. We have room, right, Daddy?" And Marcus felt his eyes burn because, yes, they did have room. They had so much room. Their home was full of empty spaces where Sarah used to be. Empty chairs at the dinner table, empty mornings without laughter, empty evenings without another adult to share the weight of the world with. And maybe, just maybe, those empty spaces weren't meant to stay empty forever. Maybe they could be filled not with replacement, but with new love, different love, the kind of love that says, "I see your pain, and I'm not afraid of it." So Marcus nodded, his voice rough, and said, "Yeah, baby, we have room." And Alina covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders shook. And Zoe scrambled out of her chair and hugged Alina fiercely, and Marcus let them have that moment, blinking hard and looking out the cafe window at the street beyond, thinking that maybe Sarah would approve, maybe she'd want this for them. Maybe the best way to honor her memory wasn't to preserve their grief like a museum, but to let new people in, to let love grow in whatever form it took. The transformation happened slowly, in small moments that accumulated like snowflakes into something substantial. Alina started joining them for dinners at Marcus's home, bringing flowers from the farmer's market and helping Zoe set the table. And Marcus started texting her throughout the week. Silly things at first, photos of Zoe's artwork or a meme that made him think of her, and then deeper things, confessions about how hard it was to be both mother and father, how he worried he was failing Zoe, how some mornings he woke up and forgot for 3 seconds that Sarah was gone and then had to remember all over again. Alina would text back her own truths, how she sometimes went to the grocery store just to be around people, even though she couldn't hear them. How she'd rehearse conversations in her head that she'd never be able to have. How she'd started to believe she was unlovable. Too much work, too complicated, until Marcus and Zoe proved otherwise. Marcus started taking formal ASL classes at the community college on Tuesday evenings, his mother watching Zoe, and he'd practice with Alina on Saturdays. and she was patient with his mistakes, encouraging. And he realized he was working harder at this than he'd worked at anything in years, because it mattered. She mattered, this friendship mattered, and he wanted to meet her in her world, not force her to always come to his. 4 months into their friendship, Marcus invited Alina to Zoe's 6th birthday party, and Alina arrived with a handmade gift, a beautiful, illustrated book she'd created about a little girl who could hear and a woman who couldn't, and how they became best friends by learning each other's languages. And Zoe made Marcus read it 3 times in a row. And that night, after all the guests left and Zoe was asleep, Marcus and Alina sat on his back porch in the cool evening air, and he signed to her, slowly but clearly, "You changed our lives. Thank you." And Alina signed back, "You saved mine. I was disappearing. You made me real again." The crisis came unexpectedly, the way most important moments do. On a random Tuesday in October, when Marcus got a call at work that Zoe had fallen on the playground and hit her head and was being taken to the hospital as a precaution. And he drove with his heart in his throat, memories of Sarah's illness flooding back, the sterile smell of hospitals, the 2 bright lights, the waiting, and when he arrived, Zoe was okay, just a mild concussion and a bump that would bruise. But Marcus fell apart in the hospital corridor. The fear and the memories and the accumulated exhaustion of 2 years crashing over him, and he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and the nurse asked if there was someone she could call, and Marcus gasped out Alina's name and number without thinking, and 40 minutes later Alina was there, rushing through the emergency room doors, her face pale and frightened, and when she saw Marcus sitting with his head in his hands, she didn't hesitate. She went to him and wrapped her arms around him and held him while he shook, and he clung to her like a drowning man, and she didn't need to hear his sobs to understand them. She felt them, and she held him tighter, and when he finally pulled back, embarrassed and red, she cupped his face in her hands and looked at him with such fierce compassion that he felt seen in a way he'd never experienced, seen and accepted and valued, and she signed simply, "I'm here, always." And Marcus realized with a start that he loved her. Not romantically, that wasn't what this was, but deeply, completely, the way you love family. The way you love someone who shows up in the hospital on a Tuesday afternoon because you need them. And he signed back, tears still on his face, "Family. Your family?" And Alina nodded, crying too, and signed, "Family." The resolution came not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of small, deliberate choices. Marcus asking Alina to be Zoe's godmother, a role she accepted, with trembling hands and tears streaming down her face. Alina moving into a small house just 3 blocks away from Marcus and Zoe, close enough to be part of daily life. Marcus introducing Alina to his mother and siblings as part of our family, watching them welcome her with the warmth she'd been denied her whole life. Zoe's teachers being surprised and delighted when she started teaching other kids basic signs, creating inclusion where there had been ignorance. Marcus and Alina starting a small community group at the local library for deaf and hearing families to learn ASL together, turning their private transformation into something that could help others. And on the 2nd anniversary of Sarah's death, Marcus bringing Alina to the cemetery, signing to her at his wife's grave, "This is Alina. She helped us heal. I think you'd love her." That evening, back at Marcus's house, the 3 of them, Marcus, Alina, and Zoe made dinner together, moving around the kitchen in comfortable rhythm, communicating in a hybrid language of signs and words and shared understanding. And after Zoe went to bed, Marcus and Alina sat on the couch, and Marcus said, signing as he spoke, "2 years ago I thought my life was over. I was just going through the motions, trying to survive for Zoe's sake. I was so lonely, I couldn't breathe. And then you walked up to our table, scared and brave, and asked to sit down, and everything changed." Alina signed back, her movements graceful and sure. "I was disappearing. I hadn't mattered to anyone in so long, I forgot what it felt like. I went to that cafe planning to try one more time to connect, and if it didn't work, I didn't know what I'd do. And then Zoe waved at me, and you smiled, and you made space for me, and I remembered what it's like to be human, to belong. They sat together in the quiet house, in the peaceful silence that Alina lived in always. And Marcus realized that silence wasn't empty at all. It was full of presence, of breath, of heartbeat, of connection that went deeper than words. And he'd learned that from her, just as she'd learned from him that she was worthy of effort, of learning, of time, of love. 6 months later, at Zoe's school assembly, where she was receiving an award for kindness and inclusion, Alina sat between Marcus and his mother in the crowded auditorium, and when Zoe walked across the stage, she saw them and waved, and Alina waved back, her face glowing with pride. And Marcus reached over and squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back. And in that moment, Marcus understood that family isn't just blood, it's choice, it's showing up. It's learning someone else's language literally and figuratively. It's making room at your table for someone who's been standing outside in the cold. And the greatest gift we can give each other isn't solving all the problems or taking away all the pain. It's simply refusing to let each other be alone in it. And that single act of compassion, of seeing someone who's been invisible and saying, yes, sit down, you're welcome here, can change the trajectory of a life, can pull someone back from the edge, can transform loneliness into belonging, and grief into hope. And that's what they'd done for each other, Marcus and Alina. 2 lonely people who had the courage to reach across the space between them and build a bridge. And now neither of them was alone anymore. And neither was Zoe. And that made all the difference. Because, at the end of the day, we're all just looking for someone to sit with us in the cafe of life, to share the table, to see us as we really are, and choose to stay anyway. And when we find that, when we offer that, we become more fully human, more fully alive. And that's the story of how a single moment of vulnerability, a deaf woman asking a grieving father, "Can I join you?" became the beginning of healing for everyone involved. A reminder that our deepest pain can become the doorway to our greatest connection if we're brave enough to let people in.